All right, everybody, we got another Thursday live stream ahead of Game 2, Celtics Cavs, and we got a special guest here, Justin Rowan of the Chase Down podcast. He's going to join us today to tell us all about what to expect, Game 2 adjustments from the Cleveland Cavaliers, what we can look for going forward. This is Green with Envy. You guys know the deal. Let's lock in. What up, what up, what up? Welcome into another edition of Green with Envy. As always, it is a Thursday live stream, and we are here to get you set today for Game 2, Round 2 NBA playoffs, leading you right up to tip-off at the TD Garden. As always, is your boy Will Weir checking in. How you doing? How you living? Joining me today, along with our guests, we've got, of course, my best friend, co-host, and the coach of our podcast, the one and only Greg Manakis. How you doing today, Greg?
I'm good, man. Excited to talk with our guest, so I defer to him.
That's right. That's right. So let's get him in the mix here, joining us today to talk about all things Cavs. We brought in an expert here. It's Justin Rowan of the Chase Down podcast. Justin, I know you just came from an event you were doing through the Cavs organization with season ticket members and, you know, different levels of fans. So let's start there. What's the check-in with the Cavs fans post game 1? I mean, quick turnaround from a 7-game series. Come into the Garden, ends up being a 25-point loss in game 1. Where are Cavs fans at today?
I think where they're at more than anywhere is just trying to figure out how they can get the offense going, right? Like that has been a consistent theme throughout the playoffs. I actually thought, you know, from a freedom of movement standpoint, Cavs got a lot better looks than they did against Orlando, right? Like, you know, we often, you know, look at D rating as an example of, okay, who's the best defenses? But just like how you get there offensively, there's deviations, right? Like there's different styles. And obviously Boston's defense is missing a key piece in Kristaps Porzingis. But you look at kind of the regular season numbers, Orlando allowed the third fewest wide open threes per game, while Boston allows the fifth most, right? Like their ways of getting there defensively are different than Orlando. So from a Cleveland standpoint, it's okay. We got good looks, but we didn't knock them down. Do we stick with what we're doing? How can we get Darius Garland going? How can we, you know, continue to make life a little easier for Donovan Mitchell? How we get Evan Mobley going? What's going on with our shooters? So that seems to be probably the biggest question right now when it comes to Cleveland.
Yeah, when you talk about the wide open three numbers, this is more for our audience. I'm sure you have these numbers, Justin. But the Celtics, let's see, they contested 18 of 42 3-point attempts. So the Cavs shot 24 open threes. Overall, the Cavs shot 26% from 3 in game 1. They were 3 for 19 on open threes, 8 for 19 on wide open threes. But that 3 for 19 number on the open threes got to kill you, especially when you juxtapose that with the Celtics. Same shots, 9 for 22 on open threes, 6 for 17 on wide open threes. Has this been a consistent trend throughout the season? The Cavs haven't been knocking down those open shots?
Not throughout the season. You know, they set a franchise record for made threes. I always, when it comes to the tracking data, I saw a couple, like, I don't want to call them film nerds, but I'm going to call them film nerds out of
That's okay. It's a respectful term. I think it's actually a cool term.
I mean, I like to play a film nerd on this here podcast. So, you know, it's what I typically do. When it comes to that 4 to 6 range that NBA.com classifies as open, I like to call those kind of late contests because they measure at center of mass to center of mass. And if a guy's 4 feet away from you or you know, 4 to 6 feet, you got that arm reach, they're coming out. So I like to kind of classify that as, you know, a late contest and use the wide open as the open shots. But I thought actually Cleveland did a better job of contesting shots in the second half, even though Boston shot better. Like the fact that Boston on those wide open shoots 35% and then on those late contests 41%, like that's frustrating. But I think that's also a product of how those shots came, right? Like Boston got a lot of open looks early in the game, and I thought Cavs actually got a little bit lucky in terms of which of those shots missed. But then as the second quarter went on, they started hitting those shots. They started feeling confident. They started getting in a rhythm. And then those late contests aren't going to bother you as much when you're confident as a shooter. So, you know, that's one of those things that data tells part of the story, but until you go back and rewatch it and try to figure out, okay, how did we get to these results? I think sometimes that's the kind of stuff that you can miss, where it's like, well, they hit more of the contested shots, that's going to normalize. No, you have to kind of make sure that you're keeping teams out of that rhythm and not giving them those clean looks early in a game.
So speaking of a rhythm, I think a guy that's really important for this series is Darius Garland. And I think it's both offensively and defensively. He's going to be the key cog that potentially gives Cleveland a chance in this series. So let's start on the offensive side of the ball. He goes 6 of 15 in game 1, 2 of 8 from the 3-point line. Tell me a little bit about where you're at with Darius Garland. And this bleeds into one of the questions that we got from our Discord here, from our guy Fred, where he very bluntly asked, does he possess the bag to make these games competitive? Is he going to be able to join Donovan Mitchell? Something Greg and I have talked a lot about. We know Donovan Mitchell can throw on the cape, and this is kind of why we both predicted 5-game series, because we're like, Donovan getting one. Donovan Mitchell is probably, and we saw at times, even in game 1, which ended up being a 25-point game, that Mitchell had spurts where it was like, hey, you can play good. He's going to find a way to score. It's who else from the Cavs is going to join him in being able to get 20 plus, whatever it may be. And Darius Garland seems like the most likely candidate. So I'm curious to get your take here on his game 1 performance and then kind of what you expect from him going forward.
Yeah, I think when it came to game 1 from Darius, sometimes, we talk about good or bad games, but I like to kind of point out, did you play bad or did you shoot bad? And I think game 1 was a game where he had just shot poorly. No turnovers. That's really important. You want to win that possession battle against the Celtics. I thought, getting up 8 threes was a positive sign. He's the only player on the Cavs that's actually shooting better than their regular season percentage from 3. But, not to go the excuse route, but just as a point of context, we got injuries on the Cavs, right? Like Darius has been dealing with his back seizing up throughout the playoffs, and prior to the playoffs, Donovan's playing through that knee injury, which has been pretty serious. Evan Mobley's playing through that high ankle sprain. So even the players that are available are somewhat limited, but I do think he's capable of shooting better than this. Honestly, it's just going to come down to assertiveness. Like, I don't care if you're missing. He's just got to take those shots, because if you're passing up open looks against this stout Celtics defense, you're not getting a better look in that possession. I'm sorry. Like, unless it's coming off an offensive rebound and, there's a little bit of a scramble or whatever, if you're passing up open looks, you're not going to get a wide open look with how they're on a string, how great they are, in rotation and whatnot. You just got to be assertive. And if Al Horford's going to play draw up like that, he needs to keep pulling. So it's going to come down to making shots. You'd like to, see him do better in that regard. It's just frustrating. It's been a kind of a season from hell, right? Like, he started the season off with a hamstring injury in preseason. I believe it was his first game back from that, where he injured his shooting hand. Took him about a month to recover. As he was finally, he had a month straight where it was, kind of the normal 22-7 that you're used to seeing, and refinding that rhythm from 3, finally getting into that groove, and then he breaks his jaw. And, that I think it's hard to kind of overstate how big of a difference that made, because we see, even at the start of an NBA season, where players are coming off an off season where they're training every single day, they go through training camp, they go through preseason ramp up, and it still takes them a month to get into game shape and find that rhythm. To go from where Darius was at, where his mouth was wired shut for over a month, not allowed to do any exercise because any increase of blood flow is going to cause bleeding in that wire. So 0 cardio, 0 solid foods, lost 16 pounds of muscle. And then all of a sudden, okay, you're ramping back up, and you're going to have to figure it out. And, you've got the back issue. You have a death in the family. You have your ankle roll, right? Like, it's been such a tough kind of lost season for a guy that, from an on-off standpoint, was the biggest difference maker for the Cavs last year by a pretty wide margin. They had the second best offense in the league with him on, the 29th with him off.
Quick question for both of you guys. Do you guys think you could live off smoothies for 30 days?
No.
I mean, honestly, that was part of what I was thinking about when you were like, man, that sucks. He's just eating. He's got smoothies every single day for a month is what he's surviving off.
And that was during the Paris trip too, right? Like you're going there, you got great food, and all right, going to a 5-star restaurant and tell them to throw it in the blender. That sucks.
I had a question for you, Justin. We have some questions in the chat that I want to get to here in a second, but you mentioned Horford and drop. And I felt like in the first quarter, the Cavs really started to go at Horford. You know, the Celtics did that cross match they do where they had Tatum on Mobley to try and keep him out of the pick and roll action. But then they went to Okoro for a lot of dribble handoffs there. And then they got Horford involved in the action. It felt like they started to exploit something, right?
Yeah.
The Celtics got Horford off the court pretty quickly and went to our guy, Luke Cornett, who played really well in the first half of the Dean Wade game, what we like to call the Dean Wade game here in Boston. And then in the second half, in the fourth quarter, he got exposed when Mazzulla didn't adjust to George Niang and Dean Wade being on the court, where they just pulled him away from the rim. And that's how that comeback happened. So one thing that we're kind of wondering, we've been talking about, is where does that stretch big come from? Is it going to be Marcus Morris? Is it going to be George Niang getting back into the rotation instead of Tristan Thompson? In my opinion, Tristan Thompson should not be long for this series. I would throw George Niang in there quickly. I don't think Thompson offers enough and allows Cornette to be on the court and be a problem at the rim.
Yeah, he does. I think Tristan's going to have to play just because there is no Dean Wade and there is no Jared Allen. Like, if there's going to be someone to give Mobley a rest, it kind of has to be Tristan. I don't think you can really go to Damian Jones, but you're right. Like, that doesn't, that's not going to get the Celtics in rotation. That's not going to kind of put stress on them. And, I think when Horford's out there, I was a little surprised that they started with Horford on Isaac Okoro. Like, I thought that was something that they might go to if the Cavs were finding success offensively. But I thought it was actually kind of smart for them to start off that way of, all right, let's go to this right away and see what you guys can get going. And I really do like when the Cavs use Isaac Okoro as a screener, kind of in that Bruce Brown role, because when he's catching the ball and going downhill, he makes really smart reads in those spots, and they did get some good looks. But when it comes to finding that stretch big, I kind of think it has to be Marcus Morris. I might start to shift a little bit from Sam Merrill to George Niang. One of the things with Sam Merrill, I know he was, kind of fun in the regular season at times, and big part of the Cavs run when they were shorthanded. But a lot of that came against lottery teams, right? It's teams that have perimeter defenders that get caught on screens and give them that like half second of space he needs to get that shot off. What you saw when they would play like the Clippers, when they play Orlando, when they play Boston, guys that navigate screens well and stay attached and are up on your hip, it's just harder for him to be effective offensively. And honestly, I think too much focus goes on to what he's taking away from you on the defensive end of the floor. I feel like his positioning sound, he takes charges and that sort of thing. That's actually the offense where the drop off is, right? Like, if you look at the last 4 months for the Cavs, basically, they have a 116 offensive rating with him on and a 106 with him, or 116 with him off and 106 with him on. Like, it's a 10-point drop off. And that's not because he's not a good offensive player. It's just, there are some limitations. And, when you need movement shooting, some teams you can exploit in the front court, some you can exploit in the back court. I think when it comes to the Celtics, you're going to have a higher likelihood of success with George Niang, at 6'7", 6'8", taking those kind of movement shots rather than Sam Merrill. But when it's the Cavs, man, like they're just, whatever levers they're pulling aren't working. So you might have to try both of them again in this series.
Right. It's just a matter of limited options, right? And you mentioned some of the injuries that are going on. I've actually been trying to find this desperately here. Jared Allen, I'm assuming, is out for tonight's game as well. What's the latest on Jared Allen that you know of, Justin? Is there a timeline for when we might see him again in the series, or if we might see him in the series?
Not really. I mean, I'm personally, like, I don't think he's going to play tonight. I know Chris Fedor, the beat reporter for the Cavs, mentioned that he saw him in the elevator. And
I'm refreshing Twitter furiously trying to find it. I was trying to find it before you came on, and I'm still trying to find it now. No updates as of right now from what I see.
Yeah, he mentioned that Jared was using a shoe to press the buttons in the elevator so that he didn't have to use like a quick movement there. So I think this is a guy that's in a lot of pain.
That doesn't sound promising.
That does not sound promising. So, I'm not the smartest man here.
Wait a second, Justin. Is he taking his shoe off? Does he just have a shoe on his hand that he's just walking around with?
I think he was trying to, take part in shoot around and whatnot. So you got your shoot around shoe and you got your walking around shoe. So I think it was the shoot around shoe. But I'm just thinking, like,
you got your button pressing shoe that we all have with us. You carry it in your back pocket.
I mean, I certainly do.
I mean, you know how many germs there are from people touching that elevator? Like, you got to have your button pressing shoe, of course.
Look, man, after I tore my Achilles a couple months ago, I've always got footwear on, so I've got multiple options. I'm good to go. I've got a button pressing shoe. But yeah, like Jared took the elbow game one against Franz Wagner in the ribs, tried to play through it, took the elbow in the exact same spot from Franz Wagner in game four, and that kind of pushed it over the top. And I know Dunked On mentioned that this was something that Andrew Wiggins was dealing with a couple of years ago in the playoffs where the Warriors tried to play him. LeBron posted him up a couple times in a row. It hurt, pulled him for the series, and that was kind of a wrap. So, this is a tough thing. Like, you take another hit when you kind of got bruised cartilage there on the ribs, that can fracture easily. And when you fracture ribs, you can deal with things like a collapsed lung. So this is a guy that, it's heartbreaking because he was the kind of the focal point of a lot of the Cavs postseason blame, when really I think it was like across the board failure where everyone needed to play better. But he showed a lot of toughness this year, played the majority of the games after missing the start of the season, was averaging 17 and 14 against Orlando. Like, this is a big piece that they're missing that allows, like, when he's playing, it allows Evan Mobley to be that roamer defensively that unlocks their defense, right? Like, that allows him to be the Draymond Green, to be the Jaren Jackson Jr., to be the Robert Williams. That kind of helps take that defense to the next level. So missing him sucks. Missing your other backup big, kind of your third big in Dean Wade, really sucks. But, there's hope that Dean Wade is going to be available for game 3. We'll see what happens with Jared Allen.
I mean, honestly, that might be a Celtics fan worst nightmare, seeing Dean Wade again after the Dean Wade game that we talked about. That's more what we're probably concerned about. But let's stick with that defensive side of the ball here, because we did get a question in the chat here. Obviously, Derek White went off in game one, and Derek White's having just an absolute career year right now. But here's a question that we got in the chat here. How do the Cavs adjust to Derek White? Obviously, can't give him as many clean looks tonight, and something that, just to add to this, that Greg and I really talked about, in the post game after game one, was, Derek White has been, on this all-time heater recently and throughout this year. And we were joking, like, maybe Derek White's just our best player. But really, we know part of that is that it's playing off of the gravity that Jaylen Brown, who was outstanding in game one, and that Jason Tatum, who, we'll get into, there's a lot of conversations of Jason Tatum, face of USA, or is it now Anthony Edwards, so on and so forth. And there's debates that are coming down the road potentially. But he hasn't shot the ball great, but Jason Tatum's done so many other things. And when you freeze frame a lot of the Celtics offensive possessions, there's 4 and at times 5 Cavaliers that are all, their gravity, their eyes are all leaning in towards Jason Tatum, and that's what allows Derek White to do some of the things that he's doing. So I'm curious, what adjustments do you see coming to our guy's question here for Derek White here in game 2 and beyond?
2 things. One, sometimes in basketball there are no easy answers. Like, Boston, in my opinion, is the best team in the NBA. I think even if Kristaps Porzingis doesn't play, you guys are going to have a chance to win a championship here. And if he does play, I'm definitely saying you guys are going to win a championship. So, unlike some fans that always have like the easiest answer that's going to fix absolutely everything, and it's always, the guy that's not playing, it's Lamar Stevens. Sometimes there aren't easy answers. And when it comes to Boston, like, it's so hard to bring 2 to the ball. It's so hard to, show and recover when they make the right pass every time, right? Like, I think one of the biggest differentiations between Boston and Cleveland is Cleveland has 2 guys that have to work really, really hard to generate offense in Garland and Mitchell. Whereas Boston, and Kenny Smith highlighted this, like, you've got guys at every single position that can initiate. Everyone can screen. Everyone kind of knows their roles, right? And that leads to these easier looks. I think the Cavs just kind of have to play straight up, right? Like, and you're going to have to, whether that's Darius, whether that's Donovan on him, whether, you're rotating Isaac over, whoever it is, you kind of have to just play Boston straight up, because all of a sudden when you get into scramble mode, not only can Boston make the open pass and kill you there, like, it's going to lead to long rebounds. It's going to make it easier for Boston to collect those second chance opportunities. I think you kind of have to like live with the variance there. Now, the second thing I want to bring up is a gripe. Derek White is coming from the Spurs. Derek White is coming from the Spurs, one of the best player development organizations we have ever seen in the NBA. That man couldn't shoot for a lick. Then he comes to Boston, like 28 years old, and all of a sudden turns into a sniper. I hate you guys. Ron Burgundy, I hate you, but I respect you. That's the Boston Celtics right now. This is a damn good team.
So it is literally the first game he played. And so just for reference, I don't think we had a chance to discuss this. Greg and I actually live in Austin, Texas. We don't live in we're both from Boston. We grew up in
Okay.
Dorchester. But we live in Austin, Texas. So through the NBA's stupid league pass rules, the Spurs games are constantly blacked out here. So even though I know who Derek White knew who he was before he got traded, I didn't really watch his game all that much. So I was really learning about Derek White as he got traded. And one of the things that we were curious about was, man, it's like, it doesn't seem like he shoots the ball that well. He's kind of streaky. And the first game, I think he hit his first 3 shots as a Celtic. And that night, Greg and I, or maybe the next day, we were like, man, his shot looks good. What was going on? And then he went into a little bit of a funk off and on. But then these last 2 years, he has shot the hell out of the ball. And last year, it was a little bit, coming into this year, it was a little bit of, all right, was that fool's gold? Because you can look through a lot of different basketball references, and sometimes it's just your year and it's a complete outlier. Seems to be that this
I remember the Jay Crowder.
Yeah, Jay Crowder's had a few moments like that where he's fooled some people, especially in the postseason. And so, it seems to be really real. But it was just funny you saying that, because I know coming from San Antonio, we were like, man, why do people think this guy can't shoot? His shot looks pretty good. And now we're seeing kind of the results of it here.
Yeah, damn annoying.
Yeah. Justin, I have a question for you from the chat. This is from Stat Clipping. And by the way, everyone that's tuning in right now to the live stream, appreciate you tuning in. If you do have a moment, Will, Justin, make sure we're retweeting the stream, getting more people here into the stream. We got a question from Stat Clipping. All of our questions right now coming from YouTube. I want to see some Twitter questions popping through. This is from Stat Clipping. He says, and Justin, I kind of have a feeling that you're going to answer this based on how you've been describing things so far. But has anyone considered what if the Celtics lose? And I'm going to turn that to you, Dustin. Have you considered a world in which the Cavaliers win this series?
The series, I've considered it again. I would have loved if Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, Allen, Wade, Levert were all healthy, but that's not the current reality we live in. I want to get your guys' take on this, because obviously Boston has gone through kind of an extended, build around Tatum and Brown, right? And, I think similar to the Cavs, like they've made some kind of all-in hacks, whether that be Kyrie Irving, whether that be Kemba Walker, Gordon Hayward, right? Like, and they adjusted incredibly well. I think this is a really great team-building example. But on the way up, one of the things we talked about in our season preview was, would you rather go 6 games in the second round against like a Boston or Milwaukee competitive series and lose, or would you rather go to the conference finals and get swept? And my answer was, I'd rather lose in the second round in 6, because from a Cavs standpoint, they couldn't really afford to be outclassed. Like fully healthy, they couldn't afford to be outclassed last year like they were with the Knicks. You lose in 6, then you can go, all right, Garland's 23, Mobley's 22, Okoro's 23. We have a mid-level exception. We have a first-round pick. Like, there's internal growth. There's other avenues to kind of improve this roster. But if you just totally get outclassed where you look super far away, then all of a sudden that makes you question kind of the build of the core. If you guys were in my shoes, which of those 2 options would you prefer?
I personally don't think that, as currently constructed, the Cavs are a title contender in the future. And if that's the goal, then I want to get to the situation where I get rid of a piece sooner rather than later. I personally love Darius Garland. I think that he's a great player. When you watch the games, it's just so clear that Mitchell, obviously it comes down to would he re-sign with you guys, but he's the better player. So if you can get a commitment out of Donovan Mitchell, I don't think Cavs fans should be like, oh, but then what happens to Darius Garland? I don't even know if Darius Garland is at the point where it's worth like the risk. You know what I mean? Like if Donovan Mitchell walks, if Donovan Mitchell walks and you're like, no, but we have to hold on to Darius Garland, what's the other world in which you take the risk that Donovan Mitchell stays, right? Let him play out one more year and then trade Darius Garland for other pieces with the risk that maybe Donovan Mitchell walks and you're stuck with nothing, only the return for Darius Garland. I don't know that Darius Garland's good enough to kind of like play that game. So that's where I would be at, even though I really like him. He's undersized. I don't know that he's necessarily like a
6'1" undersized
player
for a point guard, or is it just kind of like not plus size?
I mean, he's listed as
slight of
6'1",
frame. I think that's probably he looks smaller. That's what I mean by like slight of frame. And so I think that sometimes
I know when they did their barefoot measurements, he did come in at 6'1". Obviously, losing the 16 pounds from the jaw injury has kind of set him back. Yeah, smoothie diet hasn't been great for him. The one thing I'll say about that is I don't think Donovan Mitchell can be a point guard. Like I
Mhm.
just flat out don't. I don't think his handle's good enough. I don't think the playmaking's good enough. Like I think he can be kind of your backup point guard when you stagger those guys where they're playing 18 minutes, and if they're playing 36 minutes a night, 18 together, 18 apart. And then you're ideally doing the same thing with the bigs where you're playing let me do my quick math, like 36 minutes there, where it's just one guard and one big. I think he can get away with that. But I think Mitchell having the best 2 seasons of his career has been partly because he's been playing with Darius Garland, right? Like Garland has been that guy that was the primary driver of the offense last year. I think there's an argument he was their best player in the playoffs last year. This just feels like such an outlier that I wouldn't be selling low, because if you do move him, I still think you need to go find a point guard to play with Donovan Mitchell to kind of alleviate that pressure as much as they do need a wing.
Here's my question. If you trade Darius Garland and you get like an Isaac Okoro version of a point guard, so like equivalent to what Isaac Okoro brings as a wing at the point
Like a
guard
prime
position.
George Hill?
Yeah, maybe like a prime George Hill, and then you get the Darius Garland version of a wing, that probably makes you a better team, right?
Yeah, but then you get into, okay, am I going to the archetype store here because I understand like what an ideal team build is, or are we building with the best talent that's available to us, right? Like a playmaking wing would be great. Like I think if you look historically, the smaller backcourts that have worked in the playoffs have someone that provides playmaking from the front court, right? Like Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, both of them were below 6 feet and they played a lot of minutes together. But you had Marc Gasol as a playmaking hub in the
Right.
front court. You had Kawhi Leonard, right? You had those type of guys that could alleviate that. And I think from
Even
a Cavs
Siakam, he was young, but Siakam at that point as well too.
right, and from a Cavs standpoint, you want that to be Evan Mobley. Jaron Allen has taken a step forward as kind of that playmaking hub, but you still are kind of missing that wing playmaker that I think would kind of help take some pressure off. I just wouldn't be selling low on Garland personally. Especially coming off of this injury year, like they might not be, as currently constructed, this core might not be good enough if they all hit their ceilings to be a contender. That's certainly possible. Most teams aren't.
Mhm.
But I think you want to kind of play it out as long as possible in terms of, let's see what is their ceiling, right? Like I think if the Toronto Raptors, they hit a ceiling after, a couple deep playoff runs and whatnot, where they kind of clearly vetted what they had. But DeMar DeRozan was 27, Kyle Lowry was 28. Their first 2 years in the playoffs, they lost in 7 in the first round at Brooklyn. Then they got swept by the Wizards. And then they made the conference finals, right? And then they had two
Right.
more runs, right? And they kind of had that feeling out process. So I think from a Cavs standpoint, like you want to kind of get to the conclusion earlier, right? Like we want to accelerate the team build and whatnot. But sometimes you have to kind of let things breathe. You have to kind of let what you have play out and see what the potential of this roster is. And I don't think there's any scenario where Donovan Mitchell walks, like in terms of like as a
You think
free
he signs
agent.
an extension?
I think he either signs in as an extension or they trade him. Like I don't think they
Yeah.
risk
Okay,
it
I
going
agree
free
with that.
agency, and that's been kind of where it's been. And I think honestly, the most likely thing is, especially with him with his knee injury and whatnot, like we don't know if he's going to get surgery in the offseason. I think it's a
Mhm.
possibility. I think he might sign an extension and then we evaluate in 2 years.
Yeah,
And
it's funny, man. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, and then at that point, you're evaluating Garland, you're evaluating Mitchell, you're evaluating Mobley, right? Like you're going to have more data points than you currently have. And I just think, there's enough room for internal growth. There's enough room for roster moves. They do have a full mid-level exception. They do have a first-round pick. They can, attach that pick to Karis LeVert, Dean Wade, other assets to try to play around it and see what's available. So just because the core has worked so well together when they are all healthy and on the court together, I don't think it's something I'm pulling the plug on just yet.
So would you, because this is where I think for you guys, I feel like your path is kind of laid out and it's really all tied to whether Donovan Mitchell signs that extension, thinking, obviously into
Yeah.
the offseason here. And if he does, great. You guys can either run it back or you can look to move Garland. You can look to break up one of the two bigs and you can kind of, and this is back to your point of looking at how the Celtics did it, was there's a string of moves that you can kind of look to of how they reshaped and reshifted this roster around the Jays when they were younger. And first we had, veteran stars, if you will. And then as it became kind of clear they're the stars and we need to build around them, there's different moves that were made specifically one you can look at is like Kemba Walker, trading him out. And obviously he was broken down, but you bring back Al Horford. Like that's been a monumental move for this team. And so, with Cleveland, it's funny. I thought we were going to get here a little bit later, but we're here now. So we're talking about the Cavs and what might happen, in the future. A lot of that is I'm assuming tied to your belief in what Evan Mobley can be on the offensive end. Defensively, I think it's established. He's going to be great. He's going to be really important. And there was a question that we had earlier here, and Greg and I talked about this, at the end of game one, Evan Mobley kind of got it going. Partially, kind of the Celtics were allowing that to happen because twos weren't going to get back in this game. Threes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, looking at game 2 in this series, but then also speaking about it from Evan Mobley going forward, where are you at with his offensive ceiling, knowing that defensively he's an all-NBA defender? He's going to be in the mix for Defensive Player of the Years down the road. That seems to be a pretty secure destiny for him. The offensive side is where it comes into play. Where are you at with Evan Mobley and what you're expecting?
Yeah, so coming into this year, I'm typically a Cavs optimist, but I like to say that I try to find, okay, what's kind of my objective belief of what's happening, and then skew to the optimistic side of what I believe is reasonable and what's going to occur. When it came to Evan Mobley, I said in our preview podcast that I didn't think that a leap was coming from him. Like, I just don't think that big men, typically bigs enter their prime at 26 years old. This guy just turned 22, right? Like, he's still a really young player. And, it's coming along slowly when it comes to his offense. Obviously, the knee surgery in the middle of the year was a setback. But he is still someone that average career best in everything, right? Like whether it's rebounding, assists, playmaking, shot 37% from 3 on low volume, right? Like every single category he was at a career best. But, there's still times where, yeah, he's playing through an ankle injury, but he's catching the ball in the roll and he's not looking at the rim, right? Or he's trying to put his shoulder into Al Horford 3-4 times for a turnaround jumper, when really, like, give it up, reset, kind of catch the ball on the move and make a more decisive move. And I think that's one of the big spots where I want to see growth from him because, like I said before, when you're building around a small backcourt, you need to have that front court playmaker. You need to have that guy that's that release valve. Because the reason why small backcourts typically don't work in the playoffs is because what defenses can do against that type of archetype with trapping, with blitzing and whatnot, just makes it so hard for a team to generate consistent offense without some sort of release valve. And last year in the playoffs, he averaged 0.09 points per possession as a roll man. Not acceptable. Not good at all. That was 1 point in 5 games. Cannot happen. But like he really needs to improve there. And I think if you're trying to ask for like an archetype or where I'd like to see him get to offensively, 7-foot Bam, like that's been kind of what I want to see. This is a guy that, despite, people talking about his limitations, he has taken and made 3 times as many threes in his career as Bam. I think he's got solid playmaking. He's got to add strength. I think, sometimes with the 3-point shot, it's better earlier in games and from a fatigue standpoint, like it's just not there later. Even just something like getting a consistent base set when you're on the move. I think that's something where strength is going to make a big difference. But a lot of it comes down to assertiveness and decisiveness, making sure that he's looking at the basket on the catch and, not trying to force it. And I think what we've seen from the Cavs too often in the playoffs is trying to break guys down one-on-one rather than relying on movement and tempo in the offense.
Before we get to an official game 2 preview here, Will, I do want to ask Justin a question as we're talking about like ceilings of players and whatnot that came up in our Discord. This was from RR23. So this is actually more of a Celtics question than a Cavs question, Justin. I just kind of want to get your opinion on it.
Mm-hmm.
From RR23, where do you guys stand on the JT versus Anthony Edwards debate? He knows it's unrelated to the Cavs series and the playoffs, but I want to know, as we're talking about Darius Garland, talking about Evan Mobley. Yeah. Where do you see Jason Tatum stacking up with Anthony Edwards? Because Anthony Edwards is the new thing, the hot new thing on the block.
Right now, I'm giving Tatum the benefit of the doubt, right? Like I think Boston is the best team in the league. And, one of the things about assembling a team this good is everyone's going to make sacrifices from a box score perspective, right? And I think sometimes that gets overlooked, right? Like a lot of fans and I think a lot of analysts just want teams to play martyr ball, right? Like, okay, we got one playmaker, everyone else stands there and shoots. Nobody touches the ball unless like it's an assist opportunity
The
for
Jalen Brunson model.
right, exactly. Or Luca at his worst, or Trey Young, right? Like heliocentric ball. And Tatum's never been that, but he has someone that has taken, made some sacrifices in order to, facilitate Derek White getting comfortable, Kristaps Porzingis getting comfortable. And I think Boston, even though the Kyrie move didn't work out and some of the other hacks they took didn't work out, I think getting star talent in and other mouths to feed is really important for development, even if it's going to hurt the box score stats. Again, I feel the same way when it comes to Donovan Mitchell and the development of Darius and Mobley, because you have to kind of find that balance of playing off of other stars, getting comfortable, developing your game alongside of other guys, and trying to find that right balance of assertiveness and deferring. And I just think that that's easier to do even if it comes with hiccups, gradually throughout your developmental process rather than, all right, you're playing as the guy for 7 years and now you're going down to Miami with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh and you're going to have to figure things out, right? Like, I just think that leads to more growing pains in the future. And Edwards, I think, has a really, really clean role, right? Like, he is a primary initiator. Rudy Gobert takes care of the defense. He obviously plays great defense himself. Karl Anthony Towns is providing spacing, and he's kind of slid into that Robin role. Boston, man, like, this is a unique dynamic, right? Like, as I said before, it's one of their strengths. Everybody can create. Anyone can get it going. Jaylen Brown is a great player. Derek White's a great player, right? I think what Tatum's done this year has really, really impressed me, and I think he's deserved to be an MVP consideration. I think I would have him above Anthony Edwards. And right now, I'd give him the nod just because I think what he's done with the talent around him and with the responsibilities he has is really impressive.
Would you believe that there was more than a handful of Celtics fans who were furious with Jason Tatum and how he played in Game 1?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. You guys are insane. Like, let's honestly. Here's the thing: sports fans are insane. Like, it's not a Boston specific thing. Like,
Yeah.
Cavs fans have been miserable all season, even when they were winning. And like, some get miserable because they're winning, but not in the way that they want, right? And some people are mad because their parlay didn't work out, right? Like, it's just such a different environment now where I feel like almost nobody's happy, and I think some of that has to do with the parity in the NBA. But Boston's so damn good. Like, you are above the fray when it comes to parody. Like, enjoy this stuff, man. Like,
Dude,
what are we doing here?
the trolls come out hard for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. The moment one of them struggles, you will see so many tweets come across the timeline just telling, like, we got to trade one of them. They're bummed. They can't get it done in the playoffs. They're soft. All this stuff.
I mean, I saw this was on
infuriating.
one of the main Boston sports radio stations, but their subject was are all these blowouts going to hurt the Celtics in the long run? Like, basically, it's not, when you're trying to fill airtime, it's not entirely an unfair question.
Yeah.
But it's the type of Boston mindset where it's like, man, I really wish we could win these games by less because we need more crunch time practice. Like, that's the type of mentality that we get a lot. And like to Greg's point, if you have one bad game, some of the comments are coming no matter what that final result is. You're gonna, if you want to look for it, it's there, and it will be present for sure.
I mean, from a Boston standpoint, I think there is some validity to that because you guys do beat yourselves. Like, honestly, like, you should have won that championship against the Warriors. I'm mad at you guys for giving Steph Curry a legitimate championship without Kevin Durant. That's annoying as hell, right? And I think, losing to Miami when you guys have, like, you were the better team there. So I get that from that standpoint, and there's going to be that kind of scar tissue and baggage. But I think you can have a higher level of confidence here. I think this is a really damn good team. I think this team's going to win a championship. And when it comes to Jason Tatum, cut him some slack. The guy's 19 years old.
Yeah, that's always the point there. And it's funny. Like, I think, Greg, I want to do this whole JT Ant debate on maybe our Sunday podcast where we can really kind of get into it. But I've always said one of the biggest things against Jason Tatum versus Anthony Edwards, kind of what you were talking about a little bit, Justin, with like the natural way that it's kind of playing out with Anthony Edwards, is that he's good. He's getting a little bit better. They make the playoff, they make the play in, make the playoffs, and now they're in this position. Whereas Jason Tatum was in the Eastern Conference Finals Game 7 against LeBron and the Cavs in his first year and was playing a vital role with Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward out. And, the biggest complaint we had coming out of that game 7 was, yeah, man, Jason Tatum didn't touch the ball after he dunked on LeBron with 4 minutes left. He didn't touch the ball, and he's a rookie in that position. So he's almost a victim of his own success. And I think in that JT and Ant debate, but that's something that we can get into here at a later time. Let's actually pivot so we can get you out of here. We can all, let's give ourselves time to get a couple of drinks in and relax before the game starts here, since it will be supposed to be 7 p.m. Eastern, probably about a 7:15, 7:20 tip here on ESPN. But let's go to, how do we see game 2 playing out? Will it be close? Will it be like game 1? Justin, we'll start with you here. How do you think game 2 is going to play out tonight?
I can see it being closer. I think anytime you're entering a new series, there's a feeling out process, right? Like the Cavs against Orlando, you never had to figure out where the trailer is coming from, right? If they're going to hit a pull-up 3 in transition, because Orlando's not going to do that, right? Like, I think you saw in the first half, it took them a little while to get into that mode of identifying that. I think from a physicality standpoint, what was allowed versus Boston versus Orlando was dramatically different. Orlando, everyone's getting elbowed in the throat and held on every possession without a whistle. Whereas, there really was not a lot of contact allowed in game 1, right? Even the broadcast crew was like, hey, this is a lot of fouls, not one way in particular, but, this is a lot of fouls for a playoff game. That definitely didn't play into the Cavs' favor in any way, shape, or form. So I think, there's that feeling out process. You hope that they get the same kind of shot quality that they had in game 1 and knock them down. You hope that Boston having a day of rest instead of a week, it helps kind of level it out. And, from a Cavs standpoint, like this is weird because this is the first time since the 2018 playoffs where the Cavs have been an underdog in a series that I've talked about, right? Like they've been slight favorites versus the Knicks and Magic, but that's a totally different ball game versus when you're playing a team that's clearly better than you and you're a big underdog and you're shorthanded. Boston's going to need to open the door. Like you're going to need a little bit of help here. And as I mentioned before, they have done that in the past, but the Cavs have to do a good job of making sure they don't lose their grip of the rope, that they survive those runs and keep themselves in a position that if Boston's worst habits start coming through and it gets to kind of iso ball and whatnot and, settling, you need to be in position to take advantage of that. So that to me is the biggest question. But given how inconsistent Cleveland has been and given the injuries that they have, I think smart money would be on the Celtics.
What would you say is the one adjustment that you've seen Bickerstaff make throughout the year that you would see him making going into game 2 after what you saw in game 1?
Honestly, I think they have to stick
Not a
with
great
game
start.
plan. Yeah. Again, I'm an honest man here, man. Like with the personnel they have available, I think I'd stick with the same game plan, right? Like maybe the one adjustment, like I said, is try Niang versus Sam Merrill. It's tough. Niang is 2 of 17 in the playoffs from 3. He worked decently in that first game or first 2 games against Orlando, where the Cavs, had a set defense. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen were there to provide that backline help up behind him. Like it kind of worked out there. And then Orlando started playing with pace. And all of a sudden he's defending in space. And that was not working out well. And he's not hitting threes. If you're not shooting well from 3 and you're a liability on the defensive end, you're not going to play. But, he is a veteran. You hope that he can kind of put this together a little bit. But and there's no easy answers, right? Like you pull levers, but if you're not getting what you're accustomed to getting, even in the regular season or even close to that, it's tough to make adjustments and figure out a rotation.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to math, right? I feel like you guys have to
Stupid
figure out
math.
a way to win that 3-point line. So that means Max Strus gets hot. We've seen Karis LeVert go off against the Celtics. Like that was one of in our preview. That was one of my kind of wild cards of do we get a couple random Karis LeVert games where he's had 40 and 50 points against the Celtics? Like
another guy with a bulky knee.
Yeah, it's just tough. There's not, like, to your point, there's not a lot of good answers. You're going to need some help from the Celtics, and you're going to need some probably exceptionalism on your side of some things to all break correctly. But I think there's going to be, tonight, and then in game 3, if the Cavs do lose, they're going to play with some desperation in both this game and then also in game 3, and that always kind of gives you a little bit of an edge. And when you have a guy like Donovan Mitchell, this is the benefit of having a guy that he lives in the same area that the Jays do. So he's not afraid. And they're all friends too. And when you're friends, right, you just kind of feel like, yeah, this is my boy. Like, I'm going to go right at him. What do you mean Jaylen Brown stopped me? What do you mean Jason Tatum stopped me? Like, we're going to go hoop in the summertime and I'm going to bust him. So I'm just going to do it here. Like, so he has no fear of that. So when you have Donovan Mitchell, that's the type of guy. And this is why I think, if you sign him to the extension, it makes the road a lot easier going forward, because he is a guy that you can have in those situations. He's going to need to play well, but then you got to get lucky with some hot shooting and then kind of see what happens from there. See if it catches some breaks. Anything else you want to add to that, Greg?
I guess just Mitchell. At the end of the game, my brother texted me saying like, "Oh, it looked like Donovan Mitchell sprained his knee again or was limping off the court." Is that just going to be something he's dealing with the whole series until the Celtics eventually get you guys out of there? Like that knee is just flaring up on him every game.
Yeah, it's bad. He hurt it, like he was managing it pretty well against Orlando, and then in Game 6, that was when he buckled his leg on a jump shot, and he just hasn't had a 3-point shot since then. He hasn't had the same burst. Like, he's not able to play defensively the same way that he did. That was unfortunately the same game that Evan Mobley got the high ankle sprain, and like I said, there's a possibility, that they're like, maybe it's something that needs surgery to clean up. Maybe it's not. Maybe it needs time off. But unfortunately for the Cavs, like, it's frustrating. They had, the slow start to the season. Everyone was a little banged up, and then they lost Garland and Mobley. They go 3-1 actually without Garland, Mitchell, and Mobley. Then they go 9-3 with just Mitchell and Allen. Then Garland and Mobley come back and they go 9-1 there. So an 18-2 stretch all together. And the offense hits another level with Garland and Mobley back, right? Like 122 offensive rating. We're just rolling teams. The Clippers are red hot and we beat them. We outscored the Kings. And then the All-Star break hits. And right before the All-Star break, in the last game versus Chicago, Mitchell tweaks his knee. And he's never been the same since. And, we've had kind of all the follow-up injuries and issues there. And I think, you look at that stretch where they were shorthanded, and yeah, they managed to get it going against some bad teams, but every player that was stepping up in that stretch got wear and tear injuries. Dean Way's knee, Karis LeVert's knee, Max Strus's knee, Donovan Mitchell's knee, right? Like, Jared Allen was the lone exception, and of course, Franz takes his ribs out. So,
those Wagner boys are dirty, man. They're dirty. They're dirty boys. Yeah, and it's tough because with Mitchell, his superpower is his athleticism and his burst, right? And you just saw that in Game 1. Like, how often do you see him get his stuff punched at the rim? And he got it punched at the rim 3 different times. Once by Jaylen, once by Tatum, once by Luke, right? So I just think with Mitchell, your one shot to win this series was everyone like needs to magically get healthy, right, and hit a bunch of threes, and Mitchell's playing like a superstar again, and it's just not the case. This is why before the series, Will and I predicted a sweep. We thought it was going to be a sweep, and at Game 1 felt very much with that energy. It looked like the Cavs kind of right now they're playing that mental battle with themselves, like, can we get ourselves to believe we have a chance in this series? And it doesn't seem like they believe it right now. So it all can change in one game, but Justin, we appreciate you being here, man. I know we got to get you out of here, but thank you so much for being here. It was great to meet you. Will, do you have anything else you want to wrap up with?
No, man, it was awesome having you here. Hopefully, hopefully not from us, from our perspective, just being selfish. Like, hopefully this doesn't go too much longer. But, obviously, we'll have to see what happens. I'm excited to see if Donovan Mitchell can indeed put that cape on and extend this series. Justin, thank you for joining us here, man. Thank you to everybody in the chat that tuned in today. Appreciate it. Just as a reminder, post-game, Greg and I will be back here with another live stream. We'll be on YouTube and Twitter, and then we'll be on the audio feed the next morning. But we're going to get out of here. Everybody go get set up for Game 2. We will catch you guys in the post game. Justin, appreciate you being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Every time I get this high, I lose my mind. It don't take much no more until I hit the floor. Every time I get this high, it's you I find. It don't take much no more until I'm at your door.
You cut me to my core, baby. What can I say? You got me on the floor, you know I came to play. I know I shouldn't, but you seem to take my pain away. And every time I score, Jason Tatum fade away. I close my eyes and I'm floating in your